Hello everyone, my name is Rob. I normally make videos for my own channel MOTOBOB, but recently I was lucky enough to go out on the launch of the new Moto Guzzi V85 TT on behalf of Bike World, and I'm here today at LV Custom in South London to tell you all about it. So when you hear about a new Moto Guzzi, you might imagine something that's a little bit old school or unrefined and something that's firmly planted in the retro end of the market. But the new V85 TT mid-capacity adventure bike might surprise you. So of course, being a Moto Guzzi, it's still a transverse mounted 90-degree V-twin and shaft drive. And it's definitely a retro looking bike, especially the model in the white, yellow, red and black, which is based on the V65 from 1985, the Dakar Rally bike. As soon as you jump on the bike though, you'll notice that there's a good array of equipment there that puts it on a par with most modern adventure bikes. First thing you'll notice is the Tft Display, and that's really comprehensive and it adapts to different lighting conditions, so there's good visibility wherever you're riding. But you've also got things like a USB charging socket, cruise control and a ride-by-wire throttle. That ride-by-wire throttle is going to give you riding modes, so 3 riding modes. There's rain, road and off-road, and they're going to vary the ABS, traction control, throttle response and those kinds of things based on the conditions. And you've also got the option to fully disable traction control and ABS. The technology continues with things like the Bluetooth connectivity, so you can hook up your phone and do things like turn-by-turn navigation, control your music, take calls through the Switchgear. And then you've got LED lighting all round, and I really like that Maranello Eagle daytime running light. And in the tech presentation, they also said that the rear tail lights are based on the thrusters of a fighter jet, which I can kind of see, and I think they look pretty good. So overall, it's a pretty up-to-date technological package, but that kind of refinement continues on the road as well. The motor's based on the V9, which you'll find in the Bobber and the Roma, but there's been some changes to the internals, so things like titanium intake valves, aluminium push rods and a redesigned crankshaft, to name but a few, and all those things mean that the power has been lifted from that original V9. This new motor is 80 horsepower and 80 Newton meters. And I think realistically, 80 horsepower is probably the bare minimum for a touring adventure bike like this, especially if you're two up with luggage and doing some decent miles. That's going to be, as I say, the minimum that you're going to need. But it's actually a really nice motor. I really kind of got to like it as the day went on. You can see from things like the dyno chart that the torque and power delivery is very predictable and linear. But if you keep the revs up, there's enough there to have a really good time. And we were riding on some of those coastal roads in Sardinia that kind of switch back and forth, really twisty, and then up into the mountains and drop down on some mountain roads. And I think with that kind of power on this size of bike, you're never feeling like you're just riding at 50%. You feel like you're giving it a good flogging. The other equipment on the bike as well is really well set up for handling on those twisties. So we've got KYB suspension, it's 41mm upside down forks, and then a monoshock off to one side of the rear, which I think looks really good. And those are both preload and rebound adjustable, but it was well set up from the off. I think my only qualm perhaps was that it dives a little bit under braking, but I do understand that there's got to be a balance between comfort and handling, and maybe you could dial it in with a little bit of twiddling with those adjustments, but overall I felt like it was a really nice handling bike. Braking is great as well. It's got twin Brembos, radially mounted calipers up front, they're 4-pot, and there's 320mm discs, so plenty of stopping power there. Nice bike, nice and predictable. So for riding the twisties and that kind of more spirited riding, I think it's a good bike, but of course if it's going to be a genuine adventure bike, you need to be able to do a little bit of off-roading and also plenty of touring miles. So let's start with off-roading. Not my forte. I'm not a particularly good or experienced off-road rider. But the equipment's there. So on the rally themed colour of bike, which is a few £100 more expensive, you get Michelin Anarchy Adventure tyres, whereas the solid colour bike you get Metzeler Tourons. And those Metzlers are, from my experience anyway of that day riding both bikes, much better on the road, much more feel. But if you are planning to go off-roading, that might be a better option with the Michelins because they're going to give you a little bit more grip. So you get things like handguards as well and a skid plate, and those are included on the standard bike, so you're not paying for those as options. It's got a nice standing position. You've got the off-road mode that I've already mentioned, and things like the removable rubbers in the foot pegs. So there's plenty of off-road equipment on the bike, and like I say, I'm not the most experienced, but if you're like me where you're going to use the bike for commuting and road riding and a bit of touring, but you might see a gravel road and think, I fancy a go. I felt totally confident on the short stretch of gravel and stuff that we did, and I think, you know, that's the most I can recommend it. So as well as the off-roading, we've got touring, and we spent 8 hours on the bike pretty much that day, and I found it really comfortable. One thing that makes it quite accessible, I think, is the seat height. So it's 830 mils, which is not particularly tall for an adventure bike. And for me, having quite short legs, that's quite a good thing. And I think if you've got the bike loaded up with luggage, you're two up, it might be a nice thing to be able to get your feet down easily in town and get the bike nice and steady. Once you roll in there, I found the bars are nice and wide and high. The leg angle was very comfortable, and the seat's great. You know, it's flat across, and you've got a bit of room to slide back and forth, but it's got a nice bucket shape at the back. So if you are going a bit quicker, it feels quite secure. You're not slipping too far back. Pillion seat was good, and there's good grab rails, and the pegs are in a nice spot. So that's great if you're riding two up. But also it's got a 23-litre tank, so that's going to give you about 400 kilometers or 250 miles capacity, so that's legitimate touring capabilities there. The screen that comes as standard is about a half screen, and I ride mainly on this bike with no fairings, so that felt fine to me. But I think really if you're doing decent miles over the course of a day, you might go for the slightly taller screen option. So there's plenty that I liked about this bike. It was fun to ride. I think it's a decent off-roader and it's a good touring bike. Was there anything I didn't like? Well, I did find the switchgear a little bit fiddly from the off. Things like you change the riding mode by double tapping the starter button, which I found a little bit unusual. There's also a mode button, but that's not for the riding modes, that's for the mode of the menu. Now, I don't know if that's a legitimate concern, because as soon as you've owned a bike for like a week or two, it becomes second nature. You don't even need to look where the switchgear are. I think the only other negative perhaps is when you're looking at this price range of 10.5 to 11 grand, you've got loads of bikes like the Multistrada 950, the Tiger 800, the F850 GS. All of those bikes, I think, give you a little bit more power for your money. There's always going to be something out there that goes a little bit quicker for that kind of cash. But do I really think that this bike is going to be sold on total utilitarian mindset where you're trying to get the most horsepower for your money? Probably not. I think it's just going to be the looks of it, the brand, the fact that it's still produced in Italy, the character, and probably the motor. So even if you're slightly considering this bike, I'd fully recommend taking it for a spin, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I feel like I would probably need a few more miles on the bike to figure out if that vibey V-twin is going to be really comfortable over the long run. When you start it up, you do get that side-to-side wobble. It does feel a little bit tractory, and so obviously doing a lot of miles, that kind of vibration might be a little bit fatiguing. But I'm sure for some people as well, that's going to be a selling point. That is the character of a Moto Guzzi. That's what they want out of it. And if you do want something a bit different to your average adventure bike, something that stands out both visually but also the character of the motor, then perhaps this is the bike for you. So a quick thanks to LV Custom for letting us shoot here today. You can find them on Instagram. I'd really recommend checking out all their great custom bikes. You can also see some moto vlog footage of the V85 launch on my own channel, MOTOBOB, so search for that on YouTube to find that. And if you want to see more videos like this, launches, reviews on Bike World, then hit subscribe.